The other clear differentiator is that we had no support. So it was just me and my partner, Nick, and in our car with our roof tent. And so it was really cold, and I'm using like a camelback water dribbler in the freezing night to try and rinse my body and sleeping in that freezing cold tent. And so when we did have the knee injuries, I had never had injuries before. So we had no idea what to do, and we had nobody to call. And from Perth to Sydney, for example, in this last attempt, that's 3,900 kilometers, I stopped at 3 traffic lights across that distance. So you can get a sense of how vast and remote it is.
Welcome to the Seek Travel Ride podcast, where we share the stories and experiences of people who have undertaken amazing adventures by bike. Whether it's crossing state borders, mountain ranges, countries or continents, we want to share that spirit of adventuring on two wheels with our listeners. Hello, I'm your host Bella Malloy, and I'm very excited to introduce my guest for today's episode of the Seek Travel Ride podcast, Kristina Rivers. 3,970 kilometres in 11 days, 8 hours and 6 minutes. That's the exact distance and time it took for Kristina to cycle across Australia on the 14th of April 2023. Once the verification is complete, she will have the honour of saying she holds the world record for the fastest woman to ever do so. Of course, an achievement so big just doesn't come out of nowhere, and I'm really looking forward to talking with Kristina today to learn more about her story and experience. Kristina, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much, Bella. I appreciate it.
I'm really, really enthralled by your story, Kristina. Someone, setting a goal so big, so vast, and the journey that you've taken to get to that ultimate finish line. But as I mentioned, there's so much that happens from goal setting to the finish line, and everything in between I find is the most fascinating. So I'm really looking forward to digging down a bit into the details of that with you today. But a question that I do like to open up with, and I ask all of my guests, is, do you remember the very first bike you ever rode?
Oh, that's a good one. I remember my first crash. I don't remember the bike. I don't know. I might have been, 5 or 6, and I went over the handlebars and, got a scar on my left knee now from that as a legacy. But just remember the blood pooling down my leg and getting up from that and trying to hobble home, and some neighbors running out of their homes horrified with all these stones stuck in my knee, but not feeling, I guess, too fussed about it. I don't have a bad memory about that, but it's probably as far back as I can think about, but yeah.
There's a few things that come to mind there. It's sort of like you're at that age where as a kid, it's a traumatic event to have imprinted itself in your memory. And yet it's at the age in life where we seem to bounce, if that makes sense. And we can pick ourselves up and dust ourselves off. And that's interesting. The other thing that's interesting to me, you're talking about blood pooling and stuff. It takes me back to being that age. And I remember so distinctly at that age, I myself was like, if I saw blood pooling on me, I'd get really scared. And my way of dealing with that was to just go straight to my room and go to sleep, because then the blood would disappear. I don't know. It's triggered a different memory in me. But yeah, that's quite interesting. I do like exploring how people remember themselves and what memories do trigger about a first bike ride, because sometimes it gives an insight into how the bike has maybe played a part in their adult life as well. You obviously picked yourself up and dusted off that bloody knee pretty well, though, to see where you are now today. But before we get into your bicycle story, or the story about how the bike's impacted your life now, can you please introduce yourself briefly to our listeners?
So my name's Kristina Rivers. My surname I co-created with my partner. My previous surname was Stoney. His was Arnie. And we decided to come up with a new family name. And after a lot of kind of brand work around what we identify, we landed on that he identifies with the mountains and I identify with the ocean, and it's rivers that connect the two. So we landed on that as a new surname for both of us. We have 2 daughters that are aged 6, Eleanor, and 8, Indira, and all 4 of us are the Rivers family. So I'm 43 this month, and I live in Sydney, Australia. I'm North American, so I hold 3 passports, and I work in professional services. I've run my own business since 2012 with my partner, so it keeps us busy.
I absolutely love that you and your partner have taken time out and considered things like a surname and what that surname has and its significance to you and making it your own and finding that own personal connection to it. It's really unique, but I find that not just fascinating, but I just love that concept. It would be interesting. It's got me thinking now if I was to choose my own surname, what would that be? I'll spend some time later today thinking that.
For sure, we did some research around it, Bella, and if you think about it, we all of our names were created from some point. So they would have been Bella by the Mountain or Who Made the Shoes, and then we've just carried those names through. And so I think names, we attach meaning to them. We attach meaning to our children because we choose to name them, and we wanted to create a new identity for our family that was a collective. Luckily, my family and my partner Nicholas's family was okay with that as well.
Can I ask then, for yourself and Nicholas and for your family, do you have a personal favorite river in this world of ours?
Yeah, great question. So for us, rivers just are a deep sentiment to life. So wherever we cycle, we notice that there is robust life around water. They're the lifeblood of the planet. They sustain the planet. So more than a specific river, I think we feel really connected to rivers. We did, as a family, travel to New Zealand when Eleanor was 1 for her first birthday, and we did that typical kind of couple weeks in the caravan and just have these really strong memories of the beautiful, clean, rushing, bubbling waters from the mountains. And the girls, like, as soon as we got out, going to one of those rivers, and all the clothes would come off no matter how cold it was, and just rushing down the stones and immersing in that cleanness and freshness. So it's kind of just a connection to that sense of life, really.
That really resonates with me so much. Where I am here in the French Pyrenees, I live in a very small village, and typical of most valleys here and where you are in the deep mountains, there's a river that runs all the way along the valley. And the river here where we are, every bike ride, I either finish with a downhill or an uphill, but every ride tracks that river. And it's interesting just seeing the life force that comes from it. And I guess it's another
Mm.
thing that's resonating with me already in just a few minutes is just your connection to the environment as well. I know the environment plays a key part in your life as well. You chose as one of your fundraising things for your world record attempts was plant trees. So it's clearly already resonating to me just how deeply connected you feel to the environment as well and your passion for that as well.
Yes, absolutely.
You mentioned there, you come from North America. When did you move to Australia?
2009. I moved here from the Caribbean. I lived in the Caribbean before when I was 29 to study at the University of Sydney. I did my master's in education psychology.
Wow, and what brought you all the way here? So it was studying in Sydney, was it? And
It was, yeah. Mhm.
you obviously stayed. So you fell in love with the country?
I fell in love with something. uh, so, yeah, I looked up universities that had a global reputation in their education department. The University of Sydney does, and universities that were close to the ocean. So that was my criteria. No inland universities made the list
Yeah.
globally. It didn't really matter where I went. So I didn't really know much about Australia before I moved here and didn't really do enough research because I came in July thinking I was going to start my research master's in September, like we do in North America, and didn't realize that it was the middle of the year and that it was winter.
Very much so. Although, and I realise if it all becomes relative when you live in a place, you do adjust to it. But a winter in Sydney is very different to, say, a winter in many other cities around the world too. So maybe it was a gentle adjustment period, perhaps. But it is that the academic calendar is totally reversed in a way as
Mm,
well. So that would have taken some
mm,
adjusting. Not just to, but I mean, you've adjusted well to life in Australia. You've stayed there so long now, and my goodness, this ride withstanding, I'm sure you've seen so much more of Australia than the typical Australian will have ever seen as well.
yes. Yeah. So I was living in the Caribbean beforehand, which is where I learned how to ride, race, swim, run, and compete. And so it was from there that I came here. And so there was actually some weather adjustment because it felt quite cold to me and I didn't have a lot of cycling gear. So in the Caribbean, there's a really strong community and culture around triathlon. And because it's a small island, we would travel island to island to compete. So each island country would have their own culture and community around the event, and all were very inclusive. So I imagined that was the way it would be for the sport elsewhere. And so I had emailed all of the cycling clubs in Sydney to let them know I was coming to look for a friend to ride with. And would you believe nobody responded? So I started writing to races and eventually found a race that referred me to somebody that would take me for a bike ride. And that one somebody that I met on my first day in Sydney happens to be the person I'm now married to.
Oh, I love the outcome of that story, but I'm almost embarrassed of the initial response by my fellow Australians to not respond to this person wanting to establish themselves in a community.
Yeah, I would show up for an event, like a race for a triathlon, and I'd go in and we'd do the race and then be like, "Where's the barbecue? Like, where's the social?" And everyone's just in there for the race, head down and on their way. So, yeah, but my partner, Nick, he met me for the first time and took me for a ride. And I showed up wearing every bit of cycling kit I owned because of that, July, August weather. So he did think I was a bit peculiar, but obviously peculiar in a good way.
And so you obviously then, I mean, notwithstanding you met your partner, you did get into the cycling scene. You mentioned races there. Obviously, cycling was a passion for you.
It is.
I know doing some of my research that you do participate in, cycling club races, which are vastly different to the record that you've gone out to set. How do you find that environment in the clubs now and that race scene now, having been a part of it for a few years?
Yeah, I really enjoy it. I really love competition. So I find competition very meditative because it creates a singular focus. So when I'm out cycling for fun, socially, there's just as you do in group rides, there's a lot of chatter and then coffee. And when I'm cycling on my own, sometimes my mind is wandering and I'm thinking about things, coming up with ideas. And so there's a lot of kind of cognition happening at the same time as the activity. Whereas with racing, it's so narrow focus. There's no room for thinking, and it's only hold on to the wheel, go faster. You can do this. And I unleash this inner tiger, like my alter ego, where I'm just fierce. And that whole hour or 2 or 3 hours, or however that race is in that containment, is this kind of pure meditative form. So I particularly really enjoy it for that reason. It's not, I toe the line to win every time, and then that gets recalibrated during the race. So I'll toe the line to be like, yeah, I'm going to win this. And then throughout the race, it'll be like, okay, I'm going to stay with the group. And then later on in the race, it will be, I'm going to finish no matter what, even if I get dropped off the back. So that happens for me a lot. I often get dropped off the back because I'm not the fastest rider. I have that endurance pace. I don't have intensity, but it doesn't mind for me, really, because I just shift the goalposts throughout the event itself. So I encourage other women to participate in racing events as well, because there's nothing to be concerned about. It's just for fun, and it's an opportunity to best yourself or do better on your own time. Yeah, so I enjoy it. I really enjoy racing.
There's a few things there that you've reminded me of straight off the bat there as well, Kristina. The first one is that sort of state of being present in the moment in the activity of what you're doing. I remember a friend that I used to cycle with, who was a psychologist, once told me, because I was talking about this phenomena of why I like cycling and that it was great for my mental state and in terms of what I could achieve or get away from on the bike. And she told me at that stage, when your heart rate goes above a certain threshold, you can't think about anything else except the moment of the act of what you're doing at that time. You can't sort of think about all the stresses in life or what you're going to have for dinner or whatever your routines are. You're so present in that moment. And so it's interesting that that racing mindset just puts you fully focused in there. It's not that you don't enjoy the social rides and the coffee chats and the cakes at the end or whatever with your club mates, but that the racing scene rejuvenates you and fills you with an energizing spirit for being in the moment. And that sort of just triggers that for me straight away. The other thing you said there reminded me of an interview I recently did with Liz Hughes, who was talking about how she also found this competitive nature with herself as well. And that she realized the discourse in the world, growing up as a female, we're not necessarily taught to be competitive, and we're not sort of shown throughout the course of our lives that being a competitive female is necessarily a good thing to be, and to strive to be competitive and to strive for wins and to strive to be good at something isn't something in her experience growing up that was being championed. And so she herself has put herself in that role and is now a coach teaching other women to do that. And it just triggered that for me straight away as well. So I love that you reset your goals mid-race as well.
Yeah. Yeah. You've got to when you fall off the back, right?
You all of a sudden you have different things that you're looking to strive to achieve, and whether that's just getting to the end or setting a new 30-second power or, you know, being able to sprint to the line or something, it's our own personal motivators that give us that drive.
That's it.
Racing is one thing, ultra distance cycling is very much another. The thing that connects them is obviously a bike, but I need to just ask straight off the bat, the idea to cycle across Australia, how did that manifest for you? And were you actually doing ultra distances of some sort of another before this idea came into your mind?
Well, I was doing some long rides, like long gravel weekend rides or long social rides with friends. And then I did do some preparing rides. I think I just come up with really big ideas and don't really understand what they mean until they're in practice. But because I'm an activator and I kind of learn through action, I just set these ideas and then I do the work to follow through on them. So I didn't really know what it meant when I said I want to cycle across Australia, what that would actually be. It just, it looks, there it is on the map. Let's do that.
And I mean, it also depends on how you're viewing Australia on the map as well. If you're seeing Australia as just the Australian map, it doesn't give you the context of the size of it in relation to the rest of the world.
Yeah.
There is a reason why the whole country is its own continent.
Yes.
And actually something for the ride, it was really evident in me as an Australian, just how many time zones we have in our country.
Yep, having to work through that. And so that is what happened going into that first attempt 6 months ago, is I believed that I could do it on my mindset alone, because I didn't realize how many other factors needed to be considered and how actually hard of a task it was.
Do you think if you had the benefit of hindsight and you could propel yourself to knowing those factors, do you think you would have allowed yourself to wish a goal this big?
Of course, or bigger.
Oh, wow, or bigger. We might explore that as we go on.
I don't think anything bigger at this life stage. One thing that happened for me in that first attempt 6 months ago was reckoning with where I am in my life. So coming up with that goal, I want to ride across Australia, is almost a pre-family, maybe like in your 30s type. That I'm generalizing here. And so I was still coming up with plans for my future, independent of where I actually am in my life cycle, with the commitments I have as also a mother and having young children. And it really became evident to me, not in the work leading up to, because there's that, consistent riding and all the rest of it, but it really became evident to me out there that kind of grieving that life stage that I'm no longer in, that I'm no longer at this stage of life, and you can disagree with me, or listeners can disagree with me, in my mid-40s, where I can independently make up really big, audacious goals that need to prioritize how I spend my time and all of the choices I'm going to make to accomplish them. And So I almost grieved the loss of that, I guess, not capability, but stage in my life, and was reckoning or coming to terms with the goals I want to make now. And this is a choice that I choose to make now will encompass the whole family or will orientate around different members of my family. So holding space for my partner to choose something big, or maybe considering a bike adventure or a life adventure that includes all four of us. That's not individualistic. So, maybe in a year or two, we'll cycle from Patagonia to the United States for 6 months as a family of four. But I think they're going to be different things potentially until I'll still be doing goals because I think it's important for role modeling the fact that I'm a person before I'm a parent, but there'll be different types of goals until I have that independent space to make my own prioritize my own choices again. Because it's not just prioritizing the time to do the event, but all the prioritization my entire family have to make around my riding time, my health, getting to bed, lowering stress, not taking my daughter to a friend's birthday party because I have to do a long ride. There's just so many choices that impact all of us as a unit that I don't think is fair to put on them. So doing something bigger than the 12 days, because 12 days feels like the edges of time of what's possible in terms of not working, not being with the family. So doing something bigger than that, probably not at this minute, but that doesn't mean that we can't do other different types of things.
And the excitement, as you said, they will be different and they will be very different experiences, but involving the whole family as a family of four in them, I imagine will be, rejuvenating in itself as well. You touched on there just how, I'm just trying to think of the right word in my mind here, how all encompassing it is and how much of an onus on your life in general it takes to actually get yourself just to the start line of a goal this big as well. It's not, as I mentioned in my introduction, it doesn't just magic itself out of thin air. There's so much prep that has to go on. And you're right, there's a mindset that needs to be in the right place to feel that it's achievable for you.
Mm.
We often talk, especially in the ultra distance world, that it's your mind that will get you to the finish line. But you can't get to the finish line with no base fitness. And the amount of time that all the training takes up and learning your nutrition and learning about recovery and sleep, it does become so much of your life. And that you do have children, you do have a husband, you do have a career, fitting all that in around everything that's going on day to day. What were the size of your training weeks? Like, how many hours were you training typically each week leading up to your attempt?
15 to 20.
It's not a small imposition.
Yeah, for a couple of years.
Yeah, for a couple of years.
No. Yeah, it really became really clear to me about a year ago on a weekend. There was converging events. There was something with friends, there was a family camping, and then I got invited to this bike ride with a group that I didn't know. And I chose the bike ride with the group that I didn't know a year out. The amount of focus on making the right choices for such an extended period of time because I don't have natural talent. And that's the other thing I was thinking of. I mean, if I was naturally gifted as a cyclist, it would be different because there wouldn't have to be so much consistent effort, which I'm okay with putting in the consistent effort because it's fabulous role modeling for my children around the achieving something that we care about and we work towards deliberately. So I can really see that coming through in their language and the things they choose to do and how they choose to work towards things as well. So I'm okay with that, but I know that I'm not a natural athlete. I only started sport in my mid-20s and I wasn't sporty in my younger years. So there's not that kind of elastic to that younger strength.
It triggers something in me. Trigger is the wrong word, but it makes me think because I've had this internal dialogue myself, and I've listened to other guests that I've interviewed for the show have this dialogue for themselves as well. And I feel that what it resonates to is what we're taught sport means and what sporty looks like and what talent looks like. When you say you aren't naturally talented and
Mm.
you're not gifted and you don't have this thing, I sometimes wonder if that's because we're not shown different, perhaps we're shown this model of sport where the best of the best is like high intensity, high speed, fast pace. The talents that you need to set a world record in an ultra distance cycling sort of space isn't fast speed and fast pace. You need endurance. It's about constantly moving forward. It is about self belief. There is the physical element of being comfortable on a bike and being able to push a certain amount of power at a lower threshold continually, but it's doing that day in, day out. And so the counterpoint would be you're not naturally gifted to go to a track event or a cycling event or an A grade race and be at the sprint and put your hands up in the air for the win amongst a field, maybe in that sense. But personally, I feel I can't read a story and see an achievement by someone like yourself and feel that you aren't talented in that way. And I hope that with your own reflection, you'll be able to look back on and see that the talents that were required are
Yeah.
different to what we typically are shown in the media.
Yeah, no, that's an interesting observation about having that sport can look different. I like that. And but at the end of the day, my achievement, I feel, is not totally individual. It's also the team that I had around me. And it was also the favoring conditions. So the conditions weren't favorable the whole time, but they were a lot better than the first time.
Definitely. And you also say, I mean, we were talking about there, a year out from the event, what you choose to be involved in because you've got this event a year out and the sacrifices that you make, but also the sacrifices
Yeah.
that your family's making and your support team's making. And it takes a support team to help get you from that place in WA. Is it Cottesloe, I think you left from in WA? All the way to Sydney or to the Opera House and to Sydney Harbour there. It does take a team effort and a support team to get you there. But you did mention weather conditions. And for my listeners who aren't aware, Kristina did recently complete this ride successfully. The verification of the record is underway. There is a process you have to go through to be verified and as an official world record holder. But this was your second attempt because 6 months prior was your original first attempt. And can we just say that the Mother Nature and the weather gods were certainly not on your side in that first attempt, were they?
No. Yeah, so the record across Australia can happen either direction, and we didn't consider that variable. In the first attempt, we were locked into the pattern that we were going to do, fly to Perth and then ride. Had we pivoted though and gone the other way, it might have been much more successful because what we hit was unprecedented headwinds day after day and pretty horrendous windstorms. And then there was all that flooding that happened as well in northern Victoria. So this time we paid very dear attention to the weather and we looked for an optimum weather window. And we were somewhat nimble in our start date, and in that we would choose one or not go if the weather wasn't favorable. And we were also open to leaving from either location. So in this time of year, the winds were actually favorable leaving from Sydney, which is what we had planned. And 24 hours out of a possible leave date, those weather conditions changed. And in that short notice, we had to drop a camper van sponsor and our leaving kind of the setup we were putting together and buy 3 tickets, rent a camper van in Perth, buy all our supplies over there. And we did that. We took all of that quick risk, knowing that weather wins. And our dear friend who is looking at the weather science for us said that he was confident that we would do better leaving from Perth. And so we did. And we did have some favorable winds the first 5 days. There was some cross, but some beautiful tailwinds across the Nullarbor, which just made all the difference. And the weather patterns are changing all the time, so you can only really know a few days out. So we didn't really know what we were going to hit coming into New South Wales. So we hit more crosswinds and then a collection and a bit of ongoing rain. But it was worth it to have that tailwind across the Nullarbor.
Something that came across so starkly when you're currently doing your ride recap day by day, you have the ability now to compare attempt number 1 with attempt number 2.
Yeah.
And something that struck me was just It as someone who rides a bike knows, the wind when it's in your face, it can just be just the impact that it has on you, and it's not just a mental impact, but also physically and the distances that you can feasibly cover. You could be as strong as you like, but if you're pushing into a ridiculously strong headwind, moving the distances that you want to travel each day, unfortunately, it's not about mindset. There is a physical element to that as well.
Yeah.
And you recounted, I can't remember what day it was, but I think you had traveled 2 or 3 times the distance in that day with favorable wind conditions as you did in attempt number 1.
Yeah.
And we're talking distances, listeners, of the ability to be able to do 300 plus kilometers to just over 100 or so.
Yeah.
It's so, so stark.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, my days across the Nullarbor were over 400-kilometer days, back by back, and they felt easy, like if it was joyous. Yeah.
So actually, going on the feeling here, and I had it as a question for later in the stage, but I'm curious about it now. Have you heard of the term flow state before?
Mhm. Yep.
Okay, so for my listeners, flow state is where you individually, and it can be doing whatever fills you and rejuvenates you. You're in a state of flow, you're totally immersed in the experience. Time goes by without you noticing it, and you can be looking up from your task, and all of a sudden, because you're so within it and enjoying it, you look up and the day is past. And I wonder then, I have this impression as a cyclist that ending a day with this amazing tailwind, the continuous day, and seeing 400 kilometers flow in, at the end of a day, would that be a day where you're at your most flow state?
Oh, for sure.
Did you ever experience flow state during those adverse weather times as well?
Oh, flow within adversity. No. Maybe I
Maybe
still might. I've tried to block that out.
that's not even possible, right?
I don't wanna think about what I was feeling then.
I need to label this. Maybe I need to trademark this. This could be type 2 flow. You know how you have type 2 fun? Maybe there is a thing that's type 2 flow. Flow in hindsight, but not at the time.
Yeah, I don't know, no. No, but you're right, definitely that feeling of deep connection and contentment. I definitely did experience that over those Nullarbor days.
For my listeners who don't know, attempt number 1 was really marred by horrendous headwinds, bad conditions, and an injury to your knee as well that you were trying to manage. So managing high fatigue levels it felt like all events were conspiring against you. The world just didn't want you to get to that line in the way that you wanted to get to it.
Yeah, and no support. The other clear differentiator is that we had no support. So it was just me and my partner, Nick, and in our car with our roof tent. And so it was really cold, and I'm using like a camelback water dribbler in the freezing night to try and rinse my body, and sleeping in that freezing cold tent. And so when we did have the knee injuries, I had never had injuries before. So we had no idea what to do, and we had nobody to call. And from Perth to Sydney, for example, in this last attempt, that's 3,900 kilometers, I stopped at 3 traffic lights across that distance. So you can get a sense of how vast and remote it is. So when I was having those knee challenges, there was no townships, there was no hospitals or even reception. Or even if we had reception, there was no one to call. We had no idea what to do, which is a really big difference to how we went out this time.
Do you ever wonder, looking back, you pivoted and made changes. You didn't give up on your goal when attempt number 1 didn't go your way. You could have easily said, I gave it my best shot. Everyone who sees what you went through and what you endured would be amazingly proud of what you had achieved, regardless of whether you decided to do it again. Was there ever a point in time where you just thought, no, I don't want to do this again?
Maybe if we hadn't have gone now this autumn. So because we were looking for the right weather window, and after that first attempt I had to heal, and then we got into summer, and December, January, February, even March were too hot. So in March in Australia we had like some of the hottest days on record still. So we really had to wait keep coming in to April. And if we had to wait further, so if we didn't have an ideal weather window in April, I won't go out in the winter because it's too cold. So we would have had to shelve it until the following spring, which would have meant another 6 months of consistently cycling 300 to 400 kilometers a week, not getting sick, etc. And I was just like, I just don't wanna do that for another half a year. I really wanna go out and just get this done and put it behind me. But that would have been the only, demotivator, was the timing and having to wait.
Gosh, when you set a goal so big and you realize what needs to align to get you there, regardless of your personal drive to do it. I have to say, Christina, I'm just so thankful the conditions and everything lined up and that you did get to do that you did get to line up for attempt two. Because I feel and everyone is individual and perhaps no regrets, but I feel had attempt number two not occurred because things just couldn't line up for you, you sort of wonder, 5, 10 years down the track, 30, 40 years down the track, would that have been that niggling, I wonder if moment?
Exactly. You're right. And I absolutely loved it. Like, I just have such a this kind of inner expansiveness. It's like an inner achievement that really kind of fuels me and feels, yeah, it just feels amazing. So,
I feel I went on a tangent with a question that I didn't get to ask for the first attempt though. And that was we were talking about flow state earlier and how you had that and you had those amazing moments in attempt number two. And at attempt number one, from what I saw, got pretty miserable after a few days. Can I ask though, please can you tell me, did you have some great moments in attempt number one too before the misery?
oh, of course.
Oh, I want to hear
Yeah, of
about that.
course I did. I mean, it's so beautiful. I mean, there's the endless night skies. There's cycling east means cycling into sunrise, and the waking up of the day, the waking up of the forests, and then moving from forest into that Nullarbor plain. Like, it is just an exceptional landscape. So, absolutely. And being supported by my partner, I mean, feeling that connection and love, and I mean, like, yeah, him doing everything he can to help me and being out there together, having this adventure together. It's just absolutely special.
Yeah, watching attempt number one and your video on it, it really became clear to me just the importance of the role of your partner there as well.
Yeah,
And that it was the two of you in that attempt. And I don't know what there may have been further afield, but on the road, it was you and your partner there.
yeah,
That was it.
yeah.
And I feel, were there conversations you had prior to the attempt or during about whether, things didn't align up for you in attempt number one? Did your partner ever have the responsibility for yourself or for your safety? Did you ever have the conversation where he would have the ability to put the idea of not of calling the ride himself as well for you, like if you were in that state?
Oh, for sure. No, you're right. He did do that when I wasn't safe at sometimes. If he was noticing my fatigue, he'd pull me off the road and say, "That's it for the day." So he would make those executive calls for sure. But when it came to ending the attempt, he was not for it at all. So he was doing everything he could to work out how to support me to keep going. And he was trying to negotiate with his mother, who was looking after our children, to like fly our children to come meet us and like all this kind of really crazy stuff to help keep me going, because he just didn't want to end the experience. We did have to close it. It was not possible to my knees were broken, and luckily my mother-in-law talked a little bit of sense into us and said no. She was actually flying herself in a couple days, and so it, didn't have that capability, and I wouldn't actually rationally put my young children on an airplane by themselves without knowing. Yeah, like so he was really trying to work out how we could just finish, but it wasn't to be.
It's so clear then just the full commitment. Like you had full commitment for this goal. You have to do it, to want to do it, and then to try again 6 months later. But the full commitment of your partner there and supporting you as well.
Yeah,
Just to hear how supportive he was of you. And
yeah.
I'm so happy that he answered your call for company when you first moved to Sydney. That, you know,
Yeah, he was the only one. Out of like 50 emails.
and I guess the reason I highlight this as well is, and rightly so, it will be your name attached to the world record when it's official. But my goodness, he plays such a big part in that role too.
Oh, he really does.
Yeah, he's such a big part of this story. He could be nearly next to you, and I could be asking him questions as well because it really is clear just how much support is required to just take on such an undertaking. And I'm so, so genuinely happy that you had his full support that way.
Yeah. And this is how they move in life, because when we had a family, we had never sat down beforehand and had a conversation on what does parenting look like. And I think that's something that I see some of my younger friends doing now before they're starting families, because there's more, I guess, equal representation in careers. And so it just has to be done. But we just naturally assumed the typical gender roles. And I was fine with that without realizing it. And because we worked together, I did more of the parenting. I stayed home. He picked up more work. He continued to build his career, and that helped finance our family. And then I was out of work more. And we get to 2 years and we have our second child. And I'm doing little bits of work, but they're tokenistic. And then when my second child, Eleanor, was born at around 4 months old, I just all of a sudden started crying nonstop. And so I went in to see somebody who said, "You have to stop crying." And they said, "This is postnatal depression. It's very common." And I didn't, because I was happy mothering, but we'd never really, I was happy doing all the domestics as well, the cleaning and the cooking, without even realizing that what I had been sacrificing in doing that. And what I had been sacrificing, I guess, was that identity or sense of self that I had outside of doing all those roles the whole time. And just identifying it is what helped. And then we sat down, we had the conversation, and what does parenting look like going forward from here? I said, well, I don't ever want to clean a toilet. I don't want to clean the bathroom again. Okay, so how are we going to negotiate? Like, how do we get me back working again? How do we get me back in sport? And so from that period forward, we said, okay, our plan is we're going to share weekday mornings, like before workday start, because in the cycling world in Australia, group cycling happens like before 8 a.m. So since then, and Eleanor's 6 years old now, so that was 6 years ago, roughly, we have had our own mornings every week. So this year, and sometimes each year they flip out a bit depending on what's going on. So this year, my mornings are Tuesdays, Thursdays, and Saturdays. And he has Wednesdays, Fridays, and Sundays. And so we can choose to do what we want to do with our mornings. So I choose to cycle. He might cycle or paddle or work or sleep. But whatever it is our choice. And the other one is the one who looks after the kids as they're waking up and getting them ready for school. So I guess where I'm going with this is, yes, he's really supportive of me, but it's reciprocal in realizing there was, in our joint time together, there's also that period where those couple of years where I supported him.
Yeah, and both giving to each other. Yeah.
Yeah.
And again, taking that considered decision, not dissimilar to taking the considered decision of choosing your own surname, but taking the considered decision of what are we going to do as a family to make sure that each of us as individuals have our own identity, have happiness within our life, and actually putting ourselves on the trajectory, setting yourself up for success in what you want to achieve as well. And that it's supportive and it's reciprocal support that you're receiving there as well.
Yeah. Yeah.
Wow, gosh, where do I go from something just that big? Well, actually, talking about something quite big, can we discuss road trains? Uh,
Mm.
I know what they are as an Australian, but there would be people out there in my listeners who wouldn't know what they look at, like visually, or have just heard of them. Can you describe road trains and why they're something to be considered when you're setting out on a journey across Australia?
Yeah, that's a good thing to think about in terms of if I come up with like how actually big they are. But the road I was cycling across Australia is the main road. There's one road.
Straight for a lot of it too, right?
Yeah, so goods travel across the country. And it's basically, if you could imagine a train, it's like that. It's big carriages full of stuff, but on massive trucks that are going at speed on the road. So it's like cycling next to a train. They're that big, that fast, that loud. And that you can imagine if you're cycling next to a train from either direction, it like say one coming or going, the impact the wind would have or would be generated from the movement of the train is the same as a road train on a road.
And on a bike as well, when you feel that wind, and in either direction, it's a different experience as well. Like, a road train passing in the same direction can feel the suck of being swept along. It would take a lot to make sure that you're not sucked in. And, hopefully they're passing you in a safe enough distance that you're not all of a sudden feeling like you could be dragged under their wheels. But I imagine it takes concerted mental focus and effort for that not to be the case. Conversely, a road train coming in the other direction, I could just imagine the buffet. It would feel like just being hit by a massive wind gust.
Mhm.
There were 2 times in that first attempt where when road trains did pass, you did get knocked off your bike, didn't you? And not by being struck by them, but by the impacts that the wind which they created had on you?
That's right. Yeah, so I got really used to the sounds of road trains. I could tell, like, the personalities of them because of the long roads with nothing around, sound travels quite far. So I could kinda get a sense. Sometimes there would just be 1, like, "Vroom," or sometimes they'd be, like, 3, like, they'd be friends maybe going together. So it'd be bigger, but it'd be a different sound. And I could tell the sound if they were aggressive rider, if they're going fast. The best ones were way distance out. I would hear a toot, 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 and it would be like a positive toot. And as soon as I heard that, I would know that that would be a driver that would move into the other lane for me, because that was always the case. The drivers that I could hear the sound coming, I could hear it not slowing down, they would brush me and sometimes would be like, "Arr," but like right beside me instead of like before. I'm like, I know you're coming. I don't need that extra sound. So I just got kind of attuned to the personalities and then adjusted myself accordingly.
I guess falling over because of the wind of a road train the first time, I imagine experience like that happens before you know it, you're on the ground. When it happened again the second time, what were you thinking then?
Oh, look, to be honest, it wasn't a big fall. It was the end of a really long day, and I was super fatigued and emotional and, yeah, just crying, and I think I still had another 5 or 10 kilometers, like, minuscule amount in comparison to the full of the day to get to where Nick was set up for camp, and it just took me ages because I had no just rolling, so just kind of almost like a defeated pedal. Um, yeah. But it actually the second crash wasn't that big. It really wasn't. It was more probably the emotional impact of feeling having that loss of control.
Yeah, I could well imagine that. And did that rub off subsequently? Because that wouldn't have been the last road train you saw on that ride. And also in attempt number 2, you know what to expect. But was there psychologically anything for you there? Like, did you notice a change in your anticipation of the road trains? And I don't mean anticipation in that you can hear them and you know they're coming, but more your anticipation of, did that put you in like a fear state or anything like that as well?
You're right, it turned on a lot of anxiety, but not then because yeah, it's challenging, but at the same time, we did plan the Nullarbor strategically. We were able to align with the Easter long weekend, so the traffic was lighter. The psychological stress really became prominent from Wagga, which is 500 kilometers from Sydney. And because then we're getting into more urban roads, highways, more city speed traffic. And my concern was there, not so much that I wasn't able to be seen. Like I was doing everything I could do, but I could still be invisible because they're not expecting a cyclist on a highway. Where on the Nullarbor, I'd have to have been seen for ages because it's such a disparate landscape. So I had a lot more anxiety on that highway stretch. Also, the shoulder was rubbish. It was raining, like heavy rain at some points. There was really intense fog, so low visibility at some points. And then just the constant traffic, so there was no reprieve. And at some points, the highways would come into bridges, and then there's no shoulder. So I would like anxiously try and wait for a gap and ride and like be flapping my arm to say I'm visible, because there's just that, yeah, there's just that anxiety around the risk because we may have, like, I have friends who've been hit in Sydney by cars while cycling and they're injured. But if you get hit by a truck or a vehicle on a highway at that speed, there's not injury, it's death and it's immediate. So there's no, I don't know, there's no negotiation, there's no space.
No.
Anxiety is very real, it's very there. And I did have psychological stress for a couple days afterwards, like the kind of the nightmares of the being on that road in that state. It may sound unusual to some listeners, but I engage a kinesiologist and she helped me work through that and resolve some of that lingering stress so that I wouldn't associate it with it. Because when I got back from the attempt in Sydney and people were asking me to go for a bike ride, they're like, "Come on, let's go." I said, "I can't do it." And it wasn't because I wasn't physically capable, it was because mentally I could not comprehend being on a road with traffic again. And even just, like, walking next to a road with traffic was setting off the alarms in me. So I had a kinesiology session, and I talked to my coach, and he said, "Don't worry about cycling until you really feel the love and you wanna go out." And so it was even though, like, I was fine physically, like, the moment I got off my bike in Manly, I didn't actually get on a bike again for 10 days because it took a full 10 days until I was okay to go back out. And I did a little, like, 10-kilometer loop with my family. We just rode down to Manly and had a treat and came back, and that was it.
I'm so glad you found a way to help you channel your way through that fear as well. And it does remind me of when I was in Australia and like much like yourself, Christina, my cycling in Australia during the week, my ride started at 5 in the morning. And why? Because at 5 in the morning there's less traffic and there's less concern of being struck by a car because that is something that you have to consider and you choose the routes that you ride on that time. And the thing I always used to come across, and this is in Canberra where I was living with a dear friend of mine, we choose our routes wisely. There were roads we wouldn't go on. There's that balance that there's less traffic. I actually felt more visible in the dark than I did during the day because of my lights. So, these are the things, but it just reminded me of that. And I can only imagine, having day after day for so many hours a day. You were cycling, I think, 16 hours or so each day during this attempt, weren't you?
Yeah.
Yeah, like day after day with that traffic. But also what you said there, on the Nullarbor, it's one thing you know that you're being seen, but as soon as you get onto those areas where there's a bigger population base and it's not just professional truck drivers that are driving past you, it's suburban families and whatnot, that would have been intense.
Oh, for sure, and I'm riding at night, so people could be drinking or right? Like, I was riding across the highway, and there's a traffic controller, and she pulled me aside, and she said, "What possesses you to ride a push bike in the middle of the night on a highway?" I said, "That's a very good question." So they're not, like I don't have an answer for you right now, but I'm gonna keep riding because we rode all night.
Do you feel that with your sessions with the kinesiologist that you are able now that you have felt that you've dealt with that fear well enough now?
Yes,
Yeah, you do. I'm so glad to hear that, Christina. I really, really am.
thank you.
We've sort of flipped between attempt number one and attempt number two. And how far did you get in the first attempt?
2,400.
That was in how many days?
10 days.
A phenomenal achievement. Do you feel like you needed to have attempt number one to have been able to get to the finish line at attempt number two?
No, but I'm glad I did because I think it's a really good narrative for our children around trying again and what's involved. I like how that has come out.
Yeah, there was a point in the video where you said a line and it's resonated with me. Possibility is not inevitability. Just because it's
Mm.
possible doesn't mean it's going to be inevitable. And I really like that.
Yeah, and when we choose really hard things that are beyond our capability, we're gonna fall short because they're beyond our capability. So
But conversely, what you've done though is you've taken the learnings from that attempt, pivoted, made changes, had to question yourself, do I still want to do this? When the answer is yes, okay, how does this become possible again? And you made those changes. 6 months later, you're back there on the far west coast of Australia, lining up to traverse the country once again. How long was the recovery period? Because obviously, again, you've built up this amazing amount of fatigue and you've had your injuries. How long recovery period did you have before you restarted the training again?
I don't know. I'd have to look at that. But I thought for some reason when we finished in October, I thought I would be starting again in like December or January. So, yeah.
Wow. Do you look back at that now, what you were thinking in October as being unreasonable? Or do you look back at that now and think, I could, okay, yeah.
I don't think I realized the residue fatigue. So I went out and did around here where I live. We have this Tuesday morning hills ride with a group, and there's 10 of us out on Tuesday, and I'm last up every hill. It's just a beautiful group of women. And so sometimes, so they're riding up the hill, and I say, "Come on, let's go, Kristina." And there was just this like a barrier dropped. They just like I didn't have the capability to engage any intensity to meet them. It just wasn't possible. And I think part of that is training my legs, like they just have that one gear at the minute, that really kind of endurance gear, which I might need to work to break out of if I want to. But part of it is potentially just this residue fatigue because it's only been, I think, what, a couple weeks, right? And so that fatigue is probably just holding my body back because it's still doing repair and it's not ready for me. Even though I feel good and feel fine, it's actually not ready for me to engage it, like engage my muscles in a meaningful effort. So, like, I'm thankful for my body for protecting me in that way. I just have to be okay with, first across the country, last up every hill is my new t-shirt.
I was going to say, you put it on a t-shirt. I love it. I
Yeah.
love it. Do you know what I love about that? It just shows, again, it's what we were talking about in a way, about our perceptions of what talents you need and not being talented. In a way, it makes me challenge that perception of what you need to do to achieve something big. You don't need to be the fastest up a hill to be the fastest woman across Australia.
Yeah.
The fastest woman across Australia. Sorry. Do you look back at the moment? Do you believe it yet? And do you look back at it and go, oh my gosh, I did that? Like, has it truly sunk in?
No, because I contained my rides by 4-hour blocks 4 times a day. I feel like I just did a 4-hour bike ride.
Just a lot of them very close together.
Yeah.
4 of them a day for how many? Just under 12 days. So, oh my gosh. So it was hang on, is that 44 rides? I just went on 44 rides in 11 days, 8 hours and 6 minutes for 3,970 kilometers.
Yeah, that's it.
That's not.
It's not a big deal. Yeah, no, it was really great. So it was really beautiful coming into Sydney because it was midnight and I had all these friends turn up, and the Guinness requirements require there's no drafting, but riders can't even ride behind me. So they had to be 5 bike lengths behind me. So there's this beautiful peloton of women on a Thursday night at 12 a.m. in the pouring rain. And I mean, really big, fat rain. And I had not been expecting anybody. I expected me, Nick, and Ange to turn up at Manly, dip my wheel in the ocean, and go home and crawl into bed with my daughter. That was my plan. And that's what I was envisioning when I was getting closer to Manly. And there was all these people. And my children were there. There was like families with other children. I was like, what are you all doing here? And I just felt super awkward because why are you here? It's raining and cold, but they wanted to celebrate their connection to the adventure because they've been following it. So it was a shared achievement. And some people said, oh, we really need to have a gathering because not everybody could come at midnight. There's all these families from the school that were following and all these children, and obviously they couldn't all come at that time. So I said, okay, well, we'll do a coffee at this cafe, and we put it on our socials. and said everybody's welcome to come. And Nick prepared a speech. He was going to thank all of our sponsors and do like say a few things. Someone from the paper was going to come. And then so we went there and, expecting, this potential turnout and this crowd. So there's 10 people that came. And that was the best thing because it really just didn't allow me to kind of inflate my head at all about the external perception of my experience and allowed me to just hold it in myself and not having that big deal made out of it. Yes, I've done a couple podcasts, but that's really been it. I'm doing a day by day on my Instagram, but that's not really for public consumption and it's not creating further engagement. So not having that bigger public response, I guess, gives me the opportunity to not connect into that dialogue of it being something bigger than just a bike ride.
Or 44. Done really close together.
Yeah. So I was like, yeah, this is great. I love you. I love you, 10 people. And then like about 5 of us, like, my little crew, my real crew, all went out for some beers afterwards. And it was just perfect and beautiful.
Such a deep connection to that group as well. When you were saying that story of you all of a sudden you're riding, it's raining, there's people riding behind you, what are you doing? I actually got goosebumps. I still have them. Just that power of encouragement.
Mm-hmm.
And I know I myself doing big events have experienced what that means, to know there's people wishing you well, to know there's people following you along. And it does actually fill you with that spirit of encouragement to keep driving. But also conversely, without you realizing just the amount of people that you're encouraging to do things. You've spoken a few times there, Kristina, about just even the way you've raised your 2 daughters and just how the dialogues they're having about what's possible, seeing the dedication you had to this event, just the way that it's impacting on them and the inspiration that you're giving them as well, having done it.
Yeah.
Even when it hasn't sunk in yet, it's fact. And it will be inspiring to them and to others, I have no doubt. I know we've never met before apart from this podcast, but I'm just so proud that there's people like you out there to show the way.
Thank you.
To show conversely that you can be the last up the hill, but still hold the world record of the fastest across Australia. I just absolutely love it. I think it's fantastic.
Thank you.
At what stage did you realise it was real, that the attempt was happening, that you were going to be getting to that finish line? At what stage did you think, my goodness, I'm going to be a world record holder?
No, I didn't. I really approached the second ride very differently in that I never really thought about the full outcome. I only lingered on the 4-hour block and potentially the full day, but I didn't actually think about the end result until really close to Sydney.
Yeah. And then coming into Sydney, did you have that joy of having to walk your bike up the stairs over the harbour bridge to get across, or is that?
Oh, coming through the city, yeah, it was really challenging with all the lights and just being in that environment again, and the pouring rain. And then the harbour closed, the bridge was closed, so we had to like navigate different ways to go. Anyways, yeah, eventually got across and over to the other side.
And then getting off the bike, was it just relief, elation?
No, I think I said I just felt really awkward because I was like confused why there were so many people.
Yeah. You just finished off another 4-hour ride.
Yeah, I just wanted to say like thank you to everybody and make sure I appreciated everybody. But also I was obviously tired because we made the mistake leaving Wagga, dissolving the 4-hour block system, thinking we were going to go all at once. So I'd actually been riding for like 40 hours. And obviously I was wet and just thinking about, and our camper van had broken down on the way into Sydney. So I actually had to bike home after the little ceremony thing.
You get another 4-hour ride.
Yeah, I was like, what are you guys all doing here? So then I had to chat to everybody and thank everybody, and I wanted to hug everybody. And then there's like people who were there that I didn't know that had been following the adventure and wanted to have photos. And I was just like, this is just really awkward. So I didn't really have any other feelings about, finishing something momentous. Then just had to ride on home, take off my wet clothes, have a warm shower, and crawl into bed with my daughter.
You know how we've talked a little bit during this conversation and before we press record about being in the moment, having our senses attuned, that sensory experience that you get during these sort of things. I wanted to read something out to you which I picked up on one of your posts, and it was on day 6. On that day, you finished with 309.7 kilometres. You rode from Yallatu to just past Wooroola, some great Australian names there. And what you said there was, riding pre-dawn, every day means starting in what sounds quiet all around, and then a bird, then 2, and I hear the world around me wake up until a chorus meeting the rising sun. Then you go on to say, at the day's end, there is another nearly full moon rising. I love the couple of dark hours in my last 4-hour block as the world quietens, and the smell, oh my, that sweet desert earth scent is intoxicating. I breathe it in deep and hungrily. Kristina, it's really apparent for me just how present you were during the ride. And the reason why I'm saying this now is, if it's anything that I understand about memories, it's that different things trigger memories for you and for us as individuals. Smell is something that triggers a memory, that takes you to a moment, takes you to a scene. You may be sitting in that chair now, not fully sinking in exactly what you've achieved, but I'm just so incredibly excited for the fact that for the rest of your life, there's going to be things that will trigger those memories in that sort of sensory way. It's just such an amazing experience and something for you to forever have. And it doesn't matter what happens from here on from now, you did that ride and those experiences will be triggered for you, regardless of how you feel about it sat on the couch there now. I think that's great.
Absolutely. I loved hearing that. Thank you.
For our listeners who do want to find out more about Kristina and find out more about this ride that you did and whatnot, how can they follow you? How can they do that?
Yeah, so that was Kristina Rivers, wasn't it, on Instagram, where you were just reading that?
Yes.
Yeah, so just my name.
Easy. And I will provide a link to it in the show notes for our listeners as well, so they can read up and actually read through. I encourage them to go further than just the last attempt, to actually see where this all started, because you do get an appreciation of the training involved and also the appreciation of how you've changed from when that goal was first set to attempt 1 to attempt 2 as well. It really does take you on that journey. Kristina, I always like finishing my show asking my guests the same 2 questions, and they're really quick and easy ones. I feel I know the answer to potentially both of them, but maybe I'll be surprised. The first one is, if you were given the option of cycling one day up a constant climb or having to cycle into a constant headwind, which one would you choose?
Climb. Total climb.
I didn't think that was going to take much thinking.
No.
Do you approach the wind differently now, though, having had that experience?
Oh, for sure. Absolutely. It's different in the city, though. There's so many things to block it.
I remember actually when I lived in Ireland, I had the biggest appreciation for small country roads with really big hedgerows as well, because the wind would be raging in Ireland, but those hedgerows were just the best. You could just imagine, and it changes your experience. My final question, Kristina, is, and actually this sort of fits into a bit of what you were breaking your rides out into 4 hours. If you have the choice of riding for 4 hours, and you have the choice to cycle those 4 hours on your own or to cycle those 4 hours with other people, which one would you choose?
Oh, other people.
There we go. Yeah. Well, Kristina Rivers, it has been an absolute pleasure listening to you tell your story and share your experiences. I have taken myself away from this interview with so many learnings as well, and I have loved trawling through your ride and just being able to get into the details of it as well. Thank you so much.
Lovely.
Well, I'm sure you'll all agree with me that that was an absolutely phenomenal effort undertaken by Kristina in setting that world record. And I hope this interview has helped give you some further insight into exactly what it takes to undertake a challenge so big. It was pretty clear speaking with Kristina just the sacrifices that she had to undergo, not just for herself, but also for her family. And I'm really looking forward to finding out what's in her future in the way of bicycle adventures as well. Now, if you're enjoying the show, please make sure to give us a rating and review on your favourite podcast player app. It definitely helps the show to grow, pushing us out there to a wider audience and getting the algorithms set up there in our favour. And just another shout out to those of you who've sent me a message and an email to let me know how much you've enjoyed listening along to some of the interviews I have shared here and what your favourite episodes are as well. I'm so thrilled whenever I receive them, and it lets me know that I'm putting content out there which you are all enjoying. Make sure to follow me on Instagram. The account handle there is @SeekTravelRide. And until the next episode, my name is Bella Malloy. Thanks for listening.